Thank you, Professor Fuo, for the introduction and the good presentations that have been made. I'll try to share something from here. Okay. So my presentation is about a human rights approach to waste management in Nairobi, and Nairobi being a representative county for the rest of the counties in the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I begin from the thought that state directives and state directives and the state actions in directing how waste management is conducted in the counties has been, it's been a bit off, and essentially the control is on the private entities that have been hired, that have been engaged by the county government to actually manage this solid waste. So I begin from the place of an individual or a resident or a producer of waste as being an outcast of the whole process of managing the solid waste. And so on that note, that I can give a very brief background about waste management in Kenya, and of course focusing on Nairobi County. And just about 10 years after independence, there was a very successful window where services seemed to be delivered and things seemed to work, both in the education sector, in the health sector, in how waste was being managed, and in the housing sector. But then immediately, about 10 years after independence, then the country fell into economic crisis, and then came the structural adjustment programs, which then reduced the funding in public sector. And such reduction in finances to deal with essentials of solid waste disposal then meant that private actors and private entities needed to be engaged by the at the time, solid waste disposal was in the docket of the national government. So at that point, the vehicles were not enough for waste collection, and for about 3 to 5 years, Nairobi County was said to be quite polluted and unmanageable. And at that point, the national government through NEMA contracted private entities to help manage this mess. And so that has been the situation, and that's how our current county governments have managed the solid waste management in the different counties in the country. That was just the brief introduction of how solid waste management has been conducted. And if you have followed, segregation of waste is actually up to the producer of waste, because there is no value add unless the private person or unless the producer of the waste is actually going to use any recycled item from the waste. Essentially, there are no structures to encourage segregation. Although segregation has been encouraged through guidelines, we find that such guidelines do not have the legal force. They do not inspire compliance because there are no structures, there are no penalties. So even when the counties are promised to provide these facilities and to provide waste bins and promise to actually pick up these recycled materials, this has not been done. And on that note, you will find that the private entities and the private contractors are the main actors in solid waste management. And the role of the national government is then to specify where the to specify where the landfills are located, yeah, to specify where the landfills are located, and when it's been devolved to the county governments, they then provide government land that will hold or that will act as landfills. But there has been backlash between residents and communities with the county government, because county governments have been considered, are not trusted because once the litter and the waste has been thrown out there, it's not managed, it's not burnt. The way it's incinerated then produces more pollution for the communities, and there has been no structures to compensate the affected communities. And so you can imagine such a situation is worsened when we have to deal with COVID-19 related waste that is present in our domestic sector, and also in isolation center and in the healthcare sector. And so the presence of this COVID-19 related waste that is potentially infectious means that these private actors and the communities themselves have to adopt higher levels of dealing with the waste, because it's unknown the extent of the damage or the extent of the harm that this infectious waste is likely to cause to the waste producer and to the communities. And so this is not a paper to say that all is lost. It's just to show and provide or remind the entities that have duties under the Constitution and the relevant statutes, what duties then can be taken up by the national entities, by the county government, and then to also involve the communities and the waste producers who are residents and households. And so we see that there are risks in handling this COVID-19 related waste in the form of masks, in the form of the bottles and other things that are used during the PPEs and things like those. So how are they disposed? And in the uniform way of how this waste has been treated, it's just picked from the household, or it's picked from the consumers and the waste producers, and it goes and it trickles all the way on, and it's transported to the landfills. And the worst affected members of the community are the poor, who scavenge these areas, and without caution, then these people who suffer the indignity of having to scavenge through the landfills to find recyclable items, then are put at risk. And so we begin from this point of view that an individual, a waste producer, has a responsibility to segregate this waste that comes from a household, and actually burn and incinerate this infectious waste that in the form of masks, in the form of bottles and things like those. And then we also find that there is continual loss in revenue, because there hasn't been any economic node that has been facilitated along this solid waste value chain. So once the solid waste leaves the home or leaves the household, it goes all the way to the landfills. Essentially, the people who scavenge these landfills are the ones to make use of it. They're the ones who can benefit from recyclable metal scraps, plastics, and things like those. So here, in the recommendations, we find that if the county governments then provide an economic incentives to facilitate other private entities to actually provide a market for these recyclable items, then then households can begin to segregate and can understand the need to segregate these wastes, this solid waste at household level. And then, so that would then be the responsibility of the county governments. But even before we get to the county governments, let me speak a little bit about the state duties through the national authority we call NEMA. This is the National Environment Management Authority. So the National Environment Management Authority has the duty to ensure and facilitate that the members of the community have actually access and enjoy a clean and healthy environment. And since NEMA being the national entity, we find that it has not provided an oversight role over the county governments that have the functional duty to ensure that solid waste management is conducted properly. And so in the recommendations, then we state that protection of the environment and natural resources with a view to establish a durable and sustainable system of development means that the state then has to enforce duties, enforce county government duties, so that if a county government does not adhere to the regulations laid down by our Environment Management and Coordination Act, then this authority, NEMA, can institute action against the county government and provide guidelines and regulations that must be enforced by the county government. So in the absence of oversight role of NEMA, then the county government becomes a dormant participant, and becomes a dormant participant in the sense that it will collect revenue from the residents who are making payment for this waste to be collected. And that's where it ends. It will not facilitate or even encourage the communities to manage and to segregate their waste and to make use of waste in a way that is economic and beneficial to them. And so when we go to the county duties, we find that they actually have the functional duty, and they have to enact this refuse removal and solid waste management, and they have done so in the counties. And so what we have since devolution in 2010, we have not seen all counties enact solid waste management statutes. And when they do not do that, they rely and use the national government statute on solid waste management. So counties, we find that are a bit removed from the sole purpose of ensuring that benefits arising from recycling are usable for the residents and for the communities. And then this is the neglected party in solid waste management, and this would be the waste producer, the household, the household level, the neighborhood level. But even when they've been neglected by the law, they still, they have organized themselves in a way where middle-class neighborhoods manage to actually segregate their waste. They actually manage to collect the solid waste, but without accruing any benefit from it. So this is to say that if the county government facilitates and provides incentives for other private sector to buy or provide a market for scrap metals, recycled waste, etc., then this would happen. And the need to incinerate the infectious waste, there have been guidelines that have been provided by the national government, yet guidelines have no, as I mentioned earlier, the guidelines have no legal force. They do not inspire compliance, and so the promises made in the guidelines are good on paper, but completely ineffective in the actual sense. So that the duty on the waste producer from the household level is is actually taken up by all neighborhoods in the county governments. I make recommendations in the paper that the social and communal institutions present in the neighborhoods, present in the villages, have a better reach to the communities, and they have a better accountability system than the kind of obedience that the county government commands from the legal subjects. And to say that if solid waste management is devolved much further, if it's devolved much further, then there is ownership. And there is responsibility and duty that is taken up positively by the waste producers. When I say waste producers, they think of households and public entities such as markets, bus stop terminals, and the managers of such places. Then it's taken up. So we say that I recommend in the paper that community and social institutions, such as resident associations, religious organizations, such as churches, can play an instrumental role. And in fact, they have played an instrumental role in sensitizing communities to act responsibly during the COVID-19 pandemic that we are in. They have encouraged members of these institutions and members of the churches to stay at home and actually take part in virtual meetings and embrace virtual visits and virtual family engagements. And so we find that such associations, religious organizations, have command, they have a better reach, they have a deeper reach, and they command obedience from their communities. And so with this deeper reach, then there can be more accountability in how we manage and how we organize ourselves in the neighborhoods to segregate and to derive benefits that come from separation and segregation of solid waste. At the same time, in how we treat the infectious waste by incinerating. And so then the county government and the national government would come in to give prescriptions as to how this waste is to be incinerated, or where the debris of this incinerated waste is to be disposed. I speak about incineration because according to the Ministry of Health and how healthcare waste is managed is through incineration. But since neighborhoods and residents association cannot reach some of the incineration sites that have been prescribed for healthcare institutions, then such guidelines are propped and encouraged by the communal and community institutions would encourage the communities to segregate and incinerate in the proper way. The other thing I meant to say is that accountability mechanism within the community is more effective than fines and penalties. That in fact, fines and penalties would apply better in health institutions, in hospitals, and such. So let me go through the recommendations once again, see whether I've left anything. So I can just go through it again quickly. So one, that there would be, if there was a solid waste economic strategy to deal with solid waste management right from the source, then we would deal with the additional infectious waste better. And in fact, this would encourage us to rethink how, as producers of waste, of how we deal with our waste, with our solid waste from the household level. And then, yes, the county government, through provision of incentives and markets, would markets, say from manufacturing industries, to take up the recycled plastics from neighborhoods and villages would go a long way to encourage that system of management of waste, of solid waste. And then devolution, further devolution of solid waste management from the national level to cascade all the way to the household level, meaning that NEMA would provide oversight function over the county government to adhere to the National Waste Management Statute. That in fact, I think I've mentioned that if we have such intermediate economic actions, then would decrease the quantity of waste that goes to the landfills, and in that way, we would even reduce the number of the poor people who scavenge the wastes for money. And that's government tools, national tools through MCA, such as tax incentives to manufacturing industries that would purchase recycled items would also help to find spaces for such recycled items, because as is, if a neighborhood actually does segregate and recycle, there is no space for such, then they would have to find a market by themselves. And that becomes problematic in the sense that it's expensive and to take time to do that. And the last point was to include community organizations, religious organizations, and residential associations to encourage accountability and a better way of dealing with the infectious waste that arises from protection measures that we have taken to protect ourselves from the COVID-19 virus. So that's all I had for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Purity, for a very interesting presentation.